Obviously, you want to retain your best talent, and to do that, you want to make the working environment the best that you can for them. I spoke about people, places, and platform, and I genuinely believe that they are the things that add to people's satisfaction in terms of, what they're doing on a day-by-day basis. But people also want to feel like that they are empowered and that their work has meaning and impact. And so this kind of top-down hierarchy it's not something actually that people really want to be included in anymore. An example of what I did on this last year was we were kind of changing the strategy around where we were going, and I invited my full team in, so not just my leads, every single person in the organisation to do a full strategy session with me around direction setting around where we were going in the organisation, so that they could actually help drive the strategy and own it with me, that it's not a top-down piece. Hi everyone, I'm Geraldine MacCarthy and I'm head of Dropbox Business for EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa. As Vlad said, I spend a lot of my time around Europe. I came from Dublin earlier, but London prior to that, and I'm delighted to be with you all here today. For the folks in the room, what I would love to talk about is popular work cultures and maybe some of the things that we have got wrong in our work culture. I can imagine for all of you in the room, as you think about setting up your businesses or as you scale your businesses, what are the things that you want to get right? And what are the things that you want to learn from to make your business great now and to make your businesses great in the future? Before I go on, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about me, just so you know who I am, where I've come from, and a bit of my background. Starting way back early on, I was born and raised in Dublin in a very regular family. I was one of 3 girls. And in the days before there was screens to entertain kids on long journeys, we used to take a lot with my father in particular as kids. We used to entertain ourselves by looking at number plates on cars and trying to figure out who could get the biggest number or the most interesting arithmetic from a registration plate. So you can see I've always had an interest in numbers from the early days. I have to be honest, I still do this game myself now when I'm sitting in traffic. The only difference is instead of getting cred for it or credibility, my husband tells me I'm a nerd when I do it out loud. As I got older, and I was thinking about going to university, I was still very interested in learning more about the world and particularly in how things worked, and numbers always played a big part in what I did. I wasn't ready to make a serious career decision at the age of 16 or 17 going to college. Some of my friends were deciding they wanted to be lawyers or doctors or definitely business people, and I was not ready for that decision yet, so I made a decision to study physics at university in Trinity College. And at the time, there was 2 women in my class, of which I was one. I was actually jealous of my engineering colleagues who we shared lectures with, because the ratio of females to males in the engineering class was much higher than it was in my class. So I seriously hope those numbers have improved. I think they have, but it definitely was something that made me stop and think about women in STEM, and also as I've progressed in my career about women in business. More recently, I have had a family of my own, and it's really made me stop and think about how I show up in work. It's made me change my perspective on life as well. And I hope, my team will tell you, it's made me a better leader and a more balanced leader as a result. I certainly don't claim to have everything right as a working mum, but I have taken a lot of learnings from my old bosses, from friends, from mentors, and from people who have worked with me, as well as learning a few things along the way. And I like to share that back out with everybody as much as I can. So if you'd like to take any of my learnings as a working parent, if any of you are in the room, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I've published a couple of articles about what I've learned and some of the things that people have taught me along the way. A little bit about me and my career. Over the past 14 years, I've been working in tech companies. I started my tech career in Google a very, very long time ago when it was quite small, and then on to Dropbox when we had only a handful of people in Europe and a very, very small office. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about making work for everyone. Talking about my role currently, these days my job is super exciting, and I think one of the most exciting parts about my job is the number of people I get to talk to on a daily, weekly and monthly basis, not just in our business but outside our business as well. And what I think about when I think about this is that actually there's a lot of learnings that we all have together. When you think about Europe as a region, we have 27 million enterprises across our region and 227 million people working across those enterprises. People in those enterprises work in Europe on average 41.3 hours per week across Europe. And when you add that up, it means that across Europe we're working just under 9.4 billion hours per week. It's a lot, right? And it's made me think about, are we working in an effective way, and are those hours counting? According to some recent research that has been done, they estimate that actually only about 4 hours of work that happens in the modern workplace is effective working and work that really counts. I guess for all of you in the room as tomorrow's startups, you have a chance to create a new work ethic in your companies and organizations and set the future ahead in terms of what you want to do. And set a motion around where the time you give to work is valuable as opposed to just time. I know startup life can be brutal and it can be overwhelming, and it can sometimes have an overburden in terms of the physical and the mental toil that takes on you. And it's made me think about, if we change some of our current work practices, would that help? We all have those amazing days where we come out of work and we know that we have done fantastic work and we've made a really big impact. It's really energizing. I have them every now and then. How many people feel like they have that every day? Maybe show of hands. Okay, so there's no one lying in the room. How about maybe half the week? Yeah, it's not that often. Well, one person in the back, that's great. So there are some people that are managing, but it's really not that often. And it's something I've struggled with. It's something a lot of people have struggled with. But to understand this more, first of all, I think we need to look at work practices in 2019. I think today's workers are quite different to the workers that have come up in the past. You know, millennials in some ways get a bad reputation, but actually I think they've had a really positive impact on the workplace. It's myth or fable that millennials want, all they care about is perks and ping pong tables. When you talk to them and when they're interviewed for work studies, actually what they talk about is making an impact and doing meaningful work. And they're much more likely to look at places like Glassdoor to understand how other businesses work, or even before they take an offer in a business. So there's a real responsibility on companies to have the right type of culture in place, and that if they're not in place, that employees will hold them to task to make sure that this is known and that other people can be made aware of it. I also think people have a higher expectation of the type of technology that they want to use. People use the most amazing technology in their personal lives, and they expect that level of technology to take place in the workplace also. It's not always the case, but more and more we're seeing that is improving. And lastly, I think we've seen that the Expectations for work have changed. LinkedIn did a study on their platform in 2018, and 71% of the folks who responded to that survey said that they would take a pay cut if the job gave them more meaning and more sense of impact in the work that they're doing. Think about that. That's pretty impressive. Something I have done personally in Dropbox about this is something I call Idea Box. I know the guys who work with me know about this. It's literally a box, but we have called it Idea Box because we work in Dropbox. And what it is a box where anybody in any part of the organization can put their suggestion in around what they think we could be doing better or stuff that we need to change in the organization. And one of the things it's done is it's got rid of any type of hierarchy in the company. It doesn't matter how senior you are, how junior you are. It doesn't matter if you're an extrovert or an introvert. It doesn't matter if you're straight in the door or you've been with us for years. You can put in your suggestion and I will take that suggestion on board and see if it's something that we can address. And actually, very recently, one of our new grads right out of college put a suggestion in the box around a new way that we could collect contacts for our existing or potential prospects or customers in our business into our CRM system. As a result of that, we went ahead and implemented that. And we did that in my team, but then we also went out and did it globally across the full organization. And his suggestion has saved every single person on the sales team about 2 hours per week. And when you think about that at the scale that Dropbox is at now, that's a pretty impressive saving that he's made from his suggestion. And this is someone who's literally just out of college and starting fresh in his job. So it's great, and we do this all the time. I'd encourage you to think about a way that that might work in your organizations too. We've also witnessed a rapid growth of technology in our lives, as I mentioned. One of the things that I found is technology was meant to make our working lives easier. It was meant to make us more efficient and more productive. But more and more, whether I see it in work, whether I see it on my commute into the office, I think we've become slaves to the tools that were meant to make us productive. And when you think about that, instead of us focusing on doing our best work, we're focusing on how can I be more productive? How can I use my time better? The tech explosion has meant we've become absolutely obsessed with time management. And one of the things I've asked my team to do and that I try to focus on is attention management. All too often, the work that we're doing actually gets in the way of achieving impact because we have to constantly grapple with what I call work about work. Work about work is all of the processes that are unnecessarily complex, unnecessarily bureaucratic. It's flipping from platform to platform and losing attention and trying to remember if your information that you were looking for something is in a Slack channel or an email or saved somewhere on your local hard drive and trying to find where that is. This is all the technology that was meant to help us, and yet we're losing time to it and it becomes work about work. We are in a really exciting time around digital transformation. But digital transformation can only be effective if we also have digital adoption and if folks actually feel like that they are getting value from a product. So, for example, what I have seen regularly is people come into work, they have the best of all the tools available to them, and yet they spend their time working across fragmented tools, unsure where information is, unsure of the best way how to communicate with people, and unsure how to be the best and focus their attention in terms of getting the best work out of what they do. And actually, one quote that I love brings to mind for me from a guy called Herbert Simon, which he said, "A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention." Now, he actually said it 40 years ago, and I couldn't believe it when I realized this was written so long ago. It feels so relevant to today, and it's something that we really need to focus on and adjust. A study by Pegasystems in 2018 estimates that people juggle about 35 business applications on an average business day, and that 69% of people say they lose between an hour or more on flipping between applications and context switching between those. Another data point I thought that was pretty scary in here was that on average, workers check their email or messaging every 7.5 minutes in the working day. How can we get deep, meaningful work done if we're constantly switching context, if we're constantly focusing on different things rather than on the work that matters? We need to shift our thinking and think less about time as the finite resource and more about attention as the finite resource. And hopefully with some of the shifts we're seeing in technology, including AI, which will shift some of this work away from us, it will improve. But actually, I think there's a cultural shift that's needed more in general. So instead of obsessing about our time, actually to focus more on our attention and how we're using our brain power for best purpose for our companies and for the world in general. So there is some solutions, and I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about this. I think about it across 3 different types of approaches. The first is people, the second is places, and the last is platforms. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about each one of those to understand more my thinking on this. So let's go in order. Let's talk about people first. We always say that people are our most important resources, and for sure, they're definitely one of the most expensive resources that you're going to put into an organization. But we still need to prioritize this, and not just people, but actually how people are coming into work and how they're able to focus on agility, decision-making, and a sense of purpose. A lot of companies, as they scale, bring in what they call a chief customer officer or chief customer experience officer. But I'd also argue that we should have a chief employee officer to focus on making sure that we get the best out of employees and that employee engagement can increase. We know that employee engagement in Western Europe is at 10%, where people feel engaged at work. And actually in France, employee engagement is at 6%. Think about that. 94% of people not engaged in work. It feels like a big waste. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have decided to set up your own businesses or join a business that resonates with you because you don't feel like you want to go into a business where you're not engaged. You want to go in and make an impact yourself. And this is something I think we can all do. I think as you think about small businesses, there's always ways that you can have innovation in your organization, the way you can keep everybody together, brainstorm together, and work through stuff. But actually, as companies scale, one of the things that can be difficult to do is to keep that innovative edge in place. And it's certainly something that I saw at Google as it scaled, and also at Dropbox. One of the things Dropbox has done really well to work on this is to run Hack Week. So I think probably a lot of people in the room will have heard of Hack Week, which is 1 week where people will down tools and work on pet projects, whether that's something that they're fascinated about, or whether that's something that they want to fix in systems, or whether that's something new that they want to change in the product. But one of the interesting things that we do in Dropbox is we do this across the entire company. It's not just an engineering piece of work or an engineering project. It's something we do across every single team and every single company for 1 week in the year. And the impact is amazing. We have people who come together across multi-varied and diverse teams who bring in new opinions. We have engineers working alongside support agents, working through how we can fix things and thinking about things in a very different way. The next thing I'd like to talk about is, sorry, these slides are not working out for me. To be innovative, Henry Ford once said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. I love this quote, and I quote it all the time to my teams. Actually, in my teams, we hold an Epic Fail award, and that award goes to somebody who has not succeeded, but somebody who has failed. Because I believe if we're not failing, we're not pushing ourselves hard enough. And actually, by failure, we're going to be better and stronger in the future. So it's something that I would encourage you all to think about as you think about how you grow in your organizations. And lastly, with regards to people, it's around how we work with people and the expectations that we would have of our employees. The way teams have come together, particularly over the last few years, has changed drastically. And people have new expectations around the way they want to work. You can no longer sit in an office and count your head count and look at them to make sure that they're doing their work. That way of working just doesn't happen anymore. People are working across organizational lines, they're working across hierarchy, and often outside of their own organization or outside of their own geography. And what's more, teams often come together in a project format to focus on something, and that's largely based on their own competencies. And in those situations, what you find is teams will tend to self-select people that need to be working together on a particular project, rather than being told top down that this is something that they need to do. For example, a recent survey by Opinionway in France revealed that, in what is traditionally a very hierarchical organizational environment, 72% of people believe that professional authority is determined solely by competence. So think about that. That's nearly 3/4 of the workers just focusing on competence being professional authority. The traditional employer-employee relationship has changed drastically and continues to change. It's no longer focused on just a team or a business. It's focused on portfolio workers, the gig economy, and service providers, all who need to come together and work together to make something happen and in an effective way. So given that we now employ people based on competencies, I think we can never always assume that we will have all of those competencies right at our doorstep and that those people will be available to come into the office that we want them to work in. So we need to make sure that we have people that we can respect in terms of their own domain expertise, whether that's engineering, marketing, sales, or anything else, and bring them in a way that makes sense for them. I really believe that you can coach employees to help them in terms of understanding what needs to be done in a particular environment, but you can't control them. You simply have to trust them and to understand that they're here to do their best work. The next category I'd like to talk about is places. So, I think places have changed a lot over the last couple of years. In fact, I remember joining Google in 2006, and I came from an office which had no aircon, had barely a window in the building. So you can imagine my joy and elation walking into an environment like Google, which was so focused on brightly coloured walls and having a creative environment for people to work in. And I think over the last decade, people have really focused on having a work environment where people feel like it is a comfortable environment to come into. But for me, places is more than just an environment where there's a nice view, a desk beside the window, and maybe a plant or two in the office. It's really about consciously deciding how you want to create your workspace to get the best out of your culture and that folks can come in and do their best work. For example, in Dropbox, we have a lot of collaborative spaces where people can get away from their desks and come up with areas that they can brainstorm on stuff that they don't feel like they're chained to their desks all day. We also have comfy sofas that folks can sit on if they want to do their work from there. And equally quiet areas if they want to get away from the hustle and bustle on the floor to do some focused work away from all of the noise and everything that's happening. This is a pretty nice image behind me. This is one of our breakout areas, which you can see has a pool table, and we also have areas like a music room. And the focus behind this is not just to have cool areas where people can go and work, but in areas where people can come and get to know each other in a more informal way outside of the standard structures in work. The last piece I'd like to talk about is platforms, and it's something I'm pretty passionate about. If platforms need to respond to the needs of people, the reality is people are seeking out new ways to work and ways that they use the platforms that are available. Just as you might need a calm space to get away from the hustle and bustle on the working floor, I also believe you need calm working environments and virtual platforms that you can work in to get your best work done. This should have ideally a focused area away from distractions, and even best if it's away from any type of advertising distractions, which is just so prevalent in our workplace today. I mentioned earlier that we have the average worker uses 35 apps in the working day, and they use a lot of time flipping across those apps, and it's so distracting and time consuming. It also means that we're being consumed by technology, and actually solutions that were designed to help us are sucking us in and making us work for them and not the other way round. But there is hope. Deloitte did a study in 2018 where workers across Europe said they expect work to become more collaborative in the future. And that's because people actually want to work together and to do something that's impactful. It's something that makes us unique as a species. For any project, there are multiple creators, ideas, planners, and people have the tools that work best for them. If you're in finance or an accountant, I can imagine Excel is something where you would spend a lot of your time. Equally, someone in design is more than likely going to spend a lot amount of their time in something like Adobe. And for folks who work in things like communications, probably still working a lot in Word documents to make things go out to the press in a way that makes sense for them. And all of those tools should be able to come together as people work on projects together. And people should be able to collaborate on those tools in a way that makes sense for them. So whether you're using Slack, whether you're using Trello, whether you're using Zoom, all of those should be able to come together in a way that makes sense for them. Monet Business is a French digital agency, and they use Dropbox. They have said to us that Dropbox has saved their team 30% of time because everything comes together in one collaborative product. And actually Dropbox Paper, which is this screenshot you can see behind me, they've called it their new toy. And they're set up as their backup brain where everything in the company gets stored, and any new person who's looking for something can find it here. So from my perspective, I think I've mentioned that teams come from different backgrounds, skills, and really when I've seen leaders being the most effective, they've brought in allowed their teams to bring in and play to their strengths, and for everybody on their team to do the same. I really want for technology to be able to do this too, and however people decide they want to work and coordinate, that the technology should do that for them and not the other way around. Lastly, in terms of this, Dropbox has created a connected workplace. For any of you that have used Dropbox, you're probably aware that we're connected to over 200,000 apps whether it's big ones like Salesforce, Google, Microsoft, Slack, and so on, or whether it's very niche ones that are right for your business. And in terms of that, it also helps people to focus on surfacing the right information available to them at the right time. I don't expect all of you are following Dropbox on a day-to-day basis, but we've launched this very recently called the Smart Workspace. And the idea behind it is it's smart enough to help you work in a way that works for you and not the other way around. So in summary, we have a varied, exciting, and constantly evolving way of work. But not all of this change has been positive. And we've ended up getting some things wrong. We're focused on maximizing our time, when actually we should be thinking about our attention as the precious and finite, but very powerful resource. We're trapped in information overload, constantly having to switch between software and looking for workarounds to get things done. In this age of innovation, people at work need to be free to focus, to collaborate, and to do the things that are really going to impact their business, and to bring their unique creativity and skills to the workforce. I'm sure there's some main reasons why all of you have decided to establish your own companies rather than being assimilated into other people's way of working. You definitely don't want to be consumed by time-consuming tasks and distractions around things that are peripheral to actually what matter to you. When we feel empowered to focus and collaborate together, we can expect to be more successful, but also more satisfied. So by creating a new and smarter way of working together, we can really contribute to a company's purpose and find both fulfillment as well as commercial success. To do that, I think it includes people, platform, and places. And of all of these, I believe that platform and technology has the biggest potential to make a change in what we're doing. By designing tools and workflows to suit people's lives and behaviours and enable focus on collaboration and reclaiming back our working week for our business, but also for ourselves. Thank you.
Who has a first question for Geraldine? Okay, so this is a mic and you can then throw it to the next person, okay? And you have to speak here in the black thing, right? Ready?
Great. What are some of the metrics used to track employee engagement, and are those always the same across different cultures?
When you say cultures, do you mean across different geographical cultures?
Yes.
Yeah. So we run what we call a pulse survey twice a year, and we measure probably about 80 different metrics in there. It can be anything from what people think about the product and where we're going, to what people think about the CEO, right through to people's intent to stay in the organisation. And from there, we actually take all of those 80 metrics and run it up into an algorithm around employee satisfaction, around what we're doing. So we're pretty far on in this journey. But, you know, some of it is just about starting in a very light way to get those pieces and set up. When I first started, I think we only had about 20 questions in our survey, and we've definitely become more sophisticated over time. Things like work-life balance continue to be something that we focus on. Interestingly, we do see different variances across different geographies, and And we see countries, particularly like, for example, Japan, who, if you're doing it on a scale of 5, would very rarely put something on a 5 out of 5 scale, compared to somewhere like the US, where you'd be more likely to get that. So we do need to take those nuances in, and it's actually taken us time to realise that. We thought that the Japanese team were much less happy than the Americans to start, until we started to dig into the data and get cultural nuances in there. The last thing that we do is in most of the questions, we allow a space for free-form text, so that, you know, if a score is particularly high or particularly low or has changed over time, that we can get some details from people. Why? Because usually when people are pretty passionate about something, they will give you some details on it. So there are some of the things that we've done. We've also realised over time, sometimes the way that we were asking questions was intentionally asking it in a negative way. And as we went out to ask people, well, why is this so bad? Because when we talk to you, it doesn't seem like this is an issue. It has sometimes been more around the way that the question has been phrased. And so it is something around trial and error, and it's still something that we continue to adjust and improve on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hello, thank you first for the very insightful speech. We talked a lot about collaboration, and I was wondering if you had any tips regarding meetings, because they can be very unproductive and have a terrible impact on motivation, especially for us French, who are very good at unproductive meetings.
Yeah. I have some tips. I'm sure there might be other people in the room that would have tips too. Productive meetings is definitely something I hear a lot. Actually, you know, I was talking to some pretty senior CIOs earlier this week, and they were saying the same thing. So lots of companies struggle with it. There's some basic things. Dropbox has actually really started to focus on this, particularly over the last 18 months. So it's not like we have had it perfect from day one, but we've really spent some time thinking about how to make meetings most effective. And the first thing we do is make sure that there is an agenda, and that agenda has been sent out to everybody in advance. You'd be surprised the number of meetings that happen where it's called, I don't know, a business update meeting, and people don't even know what they need to come in and talk about. Do they need to do any prep in advance, or how they need to show up for that meeting? So having an agenda and having any material sent out to people in advance is really important. The second thing is to make sure you have the right people in the room. Sometimes you don't have enough people, but more than often you have too many people in the room. And particularly in early days as a company is scaling, maybe what they needed to do 3 months ago, they needed to be involved in a decision on something 3 months ago, but they no longer need to be involved in that. And it can be a painful process to say to someone, I know that you were involved in this when we were a 3-people company, but now that we're a 10-person company, we have a specialist to do that, and your talents are better focused on something else. So allowing people to be excused out of meetings and letting them know that that's better for them and it's better for the company is something that's really important. Once meetings get over about 8 people, it's very hard to have any type of decision making in the meeting. And so thinking about the size of the meeting as well as the people that you have in is very important. And then the last thing that I will just say on this, because I could probably talk about this for hours, is to think about what is the purpose for every single person in the room and what you want to get out of the meeting. So are you looking to inform people? Are you looking for people to action something? Are you looking for a decision to be made, or are you looking to brainstorm? And if you think about it along those type of dimensions, people are going to show up in the right way. So, for example, if you have a meeting where you're actually asking people to decide something, but they think they're being informed, they're going to sit back in a very passive way. Equally, if maybe as the CEO of the company, you're telling people this is where we're going and this is the direction, but they think they're coming in to make a decision, there could be a lot of discussion around something that isn't up for discussion. It's really an informed discussion. So thinking about those functions that you want out of the meeting can be helpful as well. I will say this obviously takes a bit of preparation and thoughtfulness to go in, but ultimately it's a good investment because you tend to get more out of the meetings that you have.
Thanks so much.
Hi, Geraldine. How are you? I just wanted to. I'm not much taller when I stand up. I just wanted to ask you about coaching. You spoke about coaching your employees. Is that something? Do you have a formal program? Do you encourage your managers to go on coaching courses, or do you actually have and employ coaches in the company?
Yeah, thanks. We don't have official coaches in the company, but we do, as everybody goes through new leadership training now. I will tell you now that we're a bigger company. People go through, all new leads will go through new leads training, and as part of that, they will learn coaching methodologies. I talk to a lot of people in smaller companies, and you're not going to send everybody out on a new leader model, on new leader trainings, unless you have the resources to do it. So I think there is effective ways that you can help people to be coached, whether it's about giving them the right type of models, and there is actually a lot of models out there that people can pretty much just read. Obviously if they do a course on it, they'll probably get more out of it, but even reading on some of the key coaching models will help. And there's some really old but still very effective books like The 1 Minute Manager and Situational Leadership. They're kind of interrelated. That is probably the foundation of all coaching. And so I think if people even have that as a basic, they're already probably going to get 80% of the benefit of coaching that's needed there to them. And I would say if you're in a business and you're looking for help with some of your team to get coached, getting a mentor maybe from an outside business who has done some of this before can certainly help you just understand the frameworks that are there, and that could help. Sure.
Hi. So I have actually the question, how to say, maintain the information along the employees. So what's the biggest challenge? That there are many things and projects going on, especially in the cross-culture environment. How to keep everyone up to date, taking into consideration that there are so many meetings happening every day, weeklies, monthlies. So how do you find this alternative way to keep everyone up to date, ensuring that they get all the latest information in hands? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to that, so if you want to ask me a follow-up question, please do. There's a couple of things. I think one is thinking about the tools and the repository of where you put your data. I think as someone who's maybe a leader in an organization, you do have a responsibility to make sure people are up to date on stuff, but it's also their responsibility to be able to get access to the information. For example, if they were out on holidays and they're coming back and they need to get back up to speed on stuff. And so being very clear about where you're storing your data and where you're using it so people can get back up to speed on stuff can be really helpful. Some things that we use in Dropbox is we use Slack quite regularly, where we have channels for the right types of approaches around stuff that we want to use. And it's not a company standard. I personally prefer it because it allows people to go back in and get a history of conversations that I've had on stuff if they need to do that, either because they've been out or they're new onto a project or they're new into your company or team. And I think that's very effective. Another tool that we use is one of our internal tools called Dropbox Paper, and it comes available with the Dropbox Business product. And when you open it up, it's effectively a blank sheet of paper, but with our 200,000 integrations that we have, you can effectively integrate everything in there. So whether it's an Excel file, whether it's a video that you're doing for an advertising campaign, everything can exist in there, even if they're stored in different places in your organization. People will have access to them there and can click on the links to get into the right place. Or Google Docs and so on. They can all exist in there in one place. So I do think setting a standard for having 3 or 4 different, or maybe just 1 or 2 that people want to, where people will access information at scale is quite important for people just not feeling like, actually, where do I go to find this information? And then I think lastly, there is just things that you can do where people know that they're going to get information or have a more informal conversation. So for example, maybe knowing on a Friday evening at 4 o'clock, we're going to sit down and talk about the week that's happened. we're going to give an update kind of at a strategic level around where we're going in the organisation, but allow other people to give updates around what they're doing in their business can be really helpful, particularly when you're going at a very fast pace, to make sure that people are up to speed on stuff and know what's going on. So I hope that's helpful. It's a pretty broad question, but yeah, hopefully I've answered some of it. Happy to answer more if needed.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry, I will talk about something that's not very nice, right? Because we're talking about differences, geographical differences. And here in France, we have some difference from Ireland or US. Like, you cannot fire a person easily. Sorry. How do you handle that? Like, maybe some tricks? No, just joking. Now, just you see that difference is not just about culture, but it's about some legal issues. I don't know if you have an office in France.
Yeah, so I'm not a HR expert, so I'm not sure if I can tell you all of the legalities, particularly related to France. But one of the things I will tell you is, in the very early days when I started in Dropbox, there was 2 other companies that started in Dublin pretty much the same week as we had started. So we all started with 0 employees on the same day. And after 4 months, those other 2 organisations were at 100 employees and we were at 30. And I was super, super jealous of them, because I was thinking, if I had 30 people to do all of this work, my life would be so much easier. I wouldn't be doing 10 people's job, because we would have much more people to do it. And the reason I'm telling you this is, actually, I don't really think about it kind of at the end of the process. I think about hiring as being one of the most important things you can do in a company. And that you really spend a lot of time, particularly in the early days, making sure that you get the right people. So that might mean that you say no to people, no to 5, 10, however many people, until you find the right person for your team. And particularly in the early days, you want to take a lower risk approach. Actually, in Dropbox, there was a couple of people who we thought may not be the right type of fit in the early days, because our culture and our business was so young and fragile. Taking people in that maybe didn't fit perfectly, we felt like was too much of a risk. And a year or 2 later, when we were bigger, when we were kind of 50, 60 plus people, we were able to go back to that type of profile of person again, because we had more scale to be able to absorb a little bit more risk into the business. So thinking about the amount of risk you want to take in your hiring process as you scale up the business, I think, is important. And even for me, for example, from a hiring perspective, so Arash, who's one of our co-founders, until we had scaled to 500 people, interviewed every single person individually. And as we scaled from 500 to 1,000, still continued to review every single hiring pack of those people and turn them down if they weren't the right people. And since we've gone kind of 1,000 plus, that role has kind of fallen to me for like an EMEA role perspective to do that for the team. But I have been fully trained and debriefed by Arash around, what are the things, red flags that we might need to look at, and so on. So that type of level around attention and care in your recruiting process is really important. And making sure that you're still involved in the hiring process, even if you feel like that role might be 2 or 3 levels removed from you, or something you don't have huge domain expertise on. It's actually very important, and something I'd encourage you to think about.
A flip side to his question: how do you retain your talent and you remain competitive from a work environment aspect? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, this is something, the tech market is very exciting, and it's really booming right now. I think there's a couple of things. Obviously, you want to retain your best talent, and to do that, you want to make the working environment the best that you can for them. I spoke about people, places, and platform, and I genuinely believe that they are the things that add to people's satisfaction in terms of, what they're doing on a day-by-day basis. But people also want to feel like that they are empowered and that their work has meaning and impact. And so this kind of top-down hierarchy is it's not something actually that people really want to be included in anymore. An example of what I did on this last year was we were kind of changing the strategy around where we were going, and I invited my full team in, so not just my leads, every single person in the organisation to do a full strategy session with me around direction setting around where we were going in the organisation, so that they could actually help drive the strategy and own it with me, that it's not a top-down piece. That's an example, but there's probably hundreds of examples around things that you can do on that. I think the second is to understand, what is it that drives people and what is driving their satisfaction and motivation and work. So actually the very first question that we had around employee engagement surveys, they can give you a sense around, where people are. We call it pulse because it literally gives us a pulse check on the employee health. Gives you a sense around where people are and maybe potential risks that might be upcoming in the business that you may be able to go back and address immediately. And I would say lastly, sometimes people decide, sounds brutal, but sometimes people decide to move on, and you might beg them and ask them to stay, and then they stay for 3 months and they're like, you know what, it's still not right, and you feel like you've gone through this emotional turmoil with them to get them to stay, and they had already made up their mind. So it's also about understanding maybe sometimes actually for the greater good, people will move on to different things that are right for them as well. But engagement is really the if you can start with engagement, that's where you're going to drive it. Hopefully some of the stuff I spoke about today helps you with that.
Do you try to do benchmarks with other companies on what they're doing on with Google or others on what they're doing for a better work environment, or you just go from within?
No, we don't do formal benchmarks where we'd do surveys and share surveys with each other, but certainly I think the tech industry in general is pretty collaborative, and people are very open to sharing information with each other. So we will regularly go out and talk to peer companies, to bigger companies, smaller companies, and also to new people coming into business if they've worked in other businesses and have done something different. And if we think that's something that's worth giving a try, we will do it. So we're always keeping an eye on it. Yeah, but it's more about going out and talking to people rather than anything too formal or structured. Yeah.
Hi everyone. I got really curious about the Hack Week. I would like some of you secret sauce to try to implement this in my company. We are all 10 years old startup company, let's say, super techy, so it can go from network deployment on field to data scientist. 400 people all over continents, 6 different offices around the world, so different time zone and stuff. For sure, I know they're not gonna stop the company for 1 week completely because we have technology staff are talking to us, so we need to take care of that. But how would you implement this to try to get everyone on board, from the data scientist to the network deploy guy?
Sure. Actually, a colleague of mine, Paolo, came here to talk about Hack Week before. And Thibaut, where's Thibaut? He's around somewhere. He's over there. Thibaut's on Paolo's team. So if I don't cover off this question sufficiently, grab him at the end and he will give you more details. But a couple of things that we've done. I think Hack Week has evolved as we've grown as an organisation. And for us also, there are parts of the business. We can't just, assume that Dropbox isn't going to have a Sev Zero and that everybody can just down tools, or that a customer isn't going to have an issue and a customer support rep doesn't need to be on the phone. So there are certain parts as a whole where the role is non-critical in terms of needing to do something actually today. We try to block that out of people's calendars to do that. So that will be maybe 85-90% of people, but there is a small fraction of people that still need to be on call, still need to be available to talk to customers and so on. And in those situations, what we try to do is either do shift work, so you get to do Hack Week in the morning or in the afternoon, and you split the team in half. So it's a kind of a lighter work week in terms of what they would traditionally be doing, and that they still get to do parts in there. So that's one of the things that we try to do. The other thing that we also do in terms of Hack Week, obviously people are doing projects and some of those projects will last for a full week, but sometimes people's projects may only take 1 or 2 days. Like maybe you're trying to get a pulse on how customers in France feel about something very specific. That's not a global piece around what we need to do, and that may only take a half day. So in those environments, people can opt into some of those pieces as well. So what we often find is people take on average between 1 and 3 projects on in Hack Week. So with the 3, you can see people are dipping in and out. And last thing, what we've learned is by actually posting out the projects in advance, you can ask people, do they want to get involved in those projects? And so if you know that someone has a very specific skill, maybe you need someone to do some financial planning for you, for example, and you have 3 or 4 people on your finance team, you may only need that person in for a specific amount of time, or they could do that part of the project at any stage during the week, but it still makes an impact to the project, if that makes sense. So that kind of posting the projects out in advance and asking for people to get involved has been really helpful, and has actually allowed people to work across different time zones and locations as well. Yeah. Sure.
Don't be shy, I'm going in the back anyway, so I can bring it there too.
Since no one else is asking, I just had another question on remote working. Do you see it compromise the quality of the collaboration, giving a lot of flexibility on working from anywhere and or working across geographies and stuff like that?
In my opinion, no. I think we have amazing technologies like Zoom or Google Hangouts, I think some people use as well, to allow people to collaborate at any time. And some of those tools are really fantastic in terms of how people are working. I think there's a couple of things you do need to consider as a business when you're thinking about remote working. One is, as you're thinking about it, that it's something that you do very purposefully and that you decide that that's how you're going to scale your business, as opposed to, I found this one amazing person, but they're down in Lyon and they don't want to move to Paris, so we'll figure out a way to make it work. You actually need to decide if this is something that you want to include in your culture or not, particularly as you scale, because it can be very hard if you're the only one remote worker and you've got 20 people in an office elsewhere. So it's like a decision that you need to make as a business around how you scale. And the second, which goes back to some of the questions we had earlier, is how you want meetings in particular to operate for remote workers. There's some interesting dynamics that you'll notice around as you scale from having everybody in one office to having people on video calls. So if you have everybody on a video call, so maybe it's a full remote office approach, or maybe it's just lots of people across different offices on a call, and every single person or the majority of people are dialing in from different areas, people tend to be very respectful of other people on the call because there's a sense of them understanding they're on the call and everybody else is. But if you have a meeting, let's say there's 8 people on this call and 6 of them are in one meeting room and 2 people are on the video call, the natural tendency in the room is for people to talk as if they're having a meeting within that room, and so it can be very difficult for the people over the video call to be able to get involved. So I would say it's a decision that every company needs to make, but one that I'd really encourage you to think about in a purposeful way before you go into it, as opposed to just happening by accident. Yeah.
I'm sorry I arrived late, so I hope you haven't already answered this question. So my question is, how do you create a culture when the startup is still very small, like there are only 5 to 10 people? So what are your advices and what are the concrete steps to follow?
So I would say to you, you have a culture no matter what, and you can decide to focus on it or to not focus on it. So it's something that happens no matter what. It happens about how the 5 people that you have in your business come in and show up, and the operating styles that they have today. That has already happened in your business whether you realize it or not, that's part of your culture. But there are things that you can do to be very intentional and purposeful about it. It's always good, Google actually did it in the very early days, as did Dropbox, but kind of later, where they spent time, they took a day as a very small team that had just started to talk about what were their values in terms of how they worked together and what were the values that they wanted to continue to keep in the company. You know, sometimes there's pieces in the culture that might go, actually, that you, as you sit down, you're like, that is something that we needed when we had 2 people, but I don't think we need it now that we're at this stage, but we're still operating that way. So getting very purposeful and thoughtful around, you know, what it is that you want to describe your culture, and hopefully getting it down in maybe between 3 and 10 bullet points that you can describe to anybody so people know that. I think that's one thing, so just taking that time. And then from there, making sure that you continue to nurture that culture, because particularly as you scale, as new people come in, the culture will always slightly change, but making sure that you have people that are firstly aligned with your culture, or that want to be part of that type of culture, and that you continue to nurture that, and people that know that is something that's very important to the business in terms of what you're doing. There are some things, and it goes back actually to some of the questions I had about hiring earlier on. If you know what your culture is, you know if someone's going to be the right fit for your business. So it's a really important part around how you grow your business.
Maybe a last question for Thanks for the talk. So I had a question about collaboration, and particularly like horizontal collaboration. How do you handle and foster interdisciplinarity? So when you talked about the financial analyst, how do you make him or her talk to the techies and to the business? How do you make the techies and the business side cooperate?
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm guessing it's a pain point for everyone, but I just wanted to learn more about your approach to tackling that.
Okay, so I think first of all, having a sense of mission and purpose around what people are doing, that's how people kind of feel. It may just be a translation thing, but you said, how do you make people talk to each other? I don't ever feel like I want to make people talk to each other. I want people to feel empowered to talk to each other and to have a curiosity for the business and a sense of ownership around the business. I haven't been in the office today at all, but I'm sure there's been lots of people doing things without me being there, because people feel a sense of ownership and empowerment around what they're doing. Now, that level of empowerment and ownership might be 6% an engagement that we spoke about in the Gallup study, or it may be at 100% in your organisation. So it's really about driving and trying to foster that level of engagement, that sense of everybody being in it together, and inclusivity and empowerment that is going to help people do that. I think it actually goes back to a lot of the stuff that we were talking about today. It's about hiring people that are naturally curious and maybe have domain expertise, but also want to learn about other stuff. Because if you're in a small company, you're not only going to just be doing your job. If you're an accountant, you're probably going to have to go and get the coffees for people, take out the bins. I've done all of this myself too. And they're the type of people that you want. And with that, you should also be getting, people that maybe want to learn a little bit more about sales, or a little bit more about communications or marketing. And they're never going to be domain experts in those fields, but they probably want to learn a little bit more about some of those pieces. And then I think second, just also going back to culture, setting that culture and tone where people feel like that they're empowered and that they have enough ownership that they can go and talk to other people is really important. And setting a tone of collaboration in the company where people feel like actually they can go and collaborate together. And maybe I, as a finance person, I have a question that I need to go and talk to somebody in sales about revenue figures, for example, and that I feel that that's okay. I feel like I can do that because we're all in it together and we're all rowing in the same direction. So I hope I've answered your question. I'm happy to talk with you more detail later on if needed.
Thanks very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks.
Que la famille